Hello, welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another gun store vlog. Today we're going to talk about the new bipartisan gun control bill that will go to a vote here in the Senate pretty shortly. Going to talk about the implications that this could have on your experience when visiting your local gun shop, as well as the implications it may have on the gun market as a whole. So if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Alright guys, jumping into this topic, many of you know who have been here before that I do own a gun store. I've been in the firearms industry for nearly 10 years. So when things like this happen, I like to do these videos from the perspective of somebody within the firearms industry and really give it that spin when we're critiquing this sort of topic. So with that being said, what we have here is a so-called bipartisan bill focused on gun control as well as other measures. It has not yet passed the Senate, but it is slated to actually go up to a vote pretty soon. It's expected to pass. So we're going to talk about the different elements of this bill and talk about sort of what they mean, at least from the standpoint of somebody who works in a gun store. Now, please keep in mind, I am not an attorney, so I'm not trying to give any type of, political analysis, legal interpretation of this. If you have any legal questions, if any of this may affect you, please direct those to your attorney. Do not use this video as legal advice. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, this is called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It is sort of a cross-up of different goals that are usually aimed for by both Republicans and Democrats. Republicans tend to want to focus on things like mental health, things like protecting schools. Democrats tend to want to aim on things like gun control, prohibiting access to firearms or the types of firearms or firearm accessories that can be owned. Now, in this bill, there is a little bit of a crossover between the two. So you do have different funds being allocated to mental health resources in schools or in generally in communities, as well as you do have legislation that is proposed here on what is going to happen with access to firearms. I'm not going to talk about mental health. I'm not going to talk about hardening schools or anything that's in this proposal. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the firearms aspect of this, as that is the industry I am in and the industry that I know. So let's go ahead and step through this. There is basically 5 different components that are being proposed here, and we'll go through those one at a time, talk about what they mean and how those will affect this industry. So subtitle A is Procedures for Firearms Purchases by Individuals Under the Age of 21. What this will require is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is NICS, to conduct an enhanced review of purchasers under the age of 21 to determine whether juvenile records disqualify that individual from purchasing a firearm. Also provides up to 10 business days total for NICS to complete that investigation if there is cause to investigate further whether records are disqualifying after the initial 3 business day period. And then there is also a sunset provision of 10 years. So let's go ahead and unpack that. So requiring the NICS system to conduct an enhanced review of purchasers of people under the age of 21. So when you go into a gun store, you are going to complete a 4473 background check. Now, the store attendant who you're working with will then put that information through the NICS system. That's the NICS Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is run by the FBI. Now, that information on the form will be run against their database to determine one of 3 statuses on you. The first is a proceed, in which case nothing was found on your record. You can go ahead and pay for the firearm and take it home that day. That is unless, of course, your state has a limitation, a cooldown, or a waiting period that would require you in your state to wait a certain amount of time. But federally, there is no such period. If you're given a proceed, you can go ahead and take it home. The second is a deny. Pretty self-explanatory. Information was found on your background check which does prohibit you from owning that firearm. You are denied and you cannot take the firearm home. Now, in some cases, people can be erroneously denied, in which case you're denied, but you are actually, in fact, able to purchase a firearm. You are confused with somebody else. In the almost 10 years I've been in business, I've had that happen a handful of times. There is an appeals process in place for those people caught in that issue, which you can appeal the decision, get it overturned, and then go back to purchasing firearms. Unfortunately, until you appeal that process, you will not be able to continue purchasing firearms with that or any other dealer, as your background check will immediately be denied since the first one triggered that denial on your background check. The appeals process can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months to complete and get that appeal get the appeal approved and the original denial overturned, which is very disappointing. I agree. It's like having your rights taken away accidentally, and you have to go through all of that process to get your ability to purchase a firearm over the counter reinstated. Again, I've had customers have to go through that. It is disheartening, but it is the way it is. The third option is a delay. A delay is obviously neither a proceed nor a deny. It means the NICS examiners need more time to go through your background check and make sure you are not a prohibited person. Now, delays, some of the reasons for delays are something like very common markers that are commonly found on other people who are delayed or denied, which would be somebody like Joe Smith. The name is very common. When an examiner puts that name through the system, it might bring up 60 people who are denied. That examiner needs more time to make sure that you are not one of those 60 people. So anytime somebody puts through a very common name on a background check, I can usually tell, yeah, this is probably at least going to go to further review and will probably be delayed. Now, in those cases, the way the rules are written, the examiners have a period of 3 business days to complete that background check and come back with a status. Now, the reason they do that is so that people cannot be left delayed indefinitely for weeks or months or years, thus inhibiting people's rights to firearm ownership. So that has to be done in what has been deemed a reasonable period of time, which is 3 business days. Now, if the examiners are unable to complete that background check in 3 business days, your status will move to open, and it'll be up to the discretion of the gun store to whether or not they want to transfer that firearm to you. They are not prohibited from transferring that firearm to you, but they can choose whether they want to or not. Now, after an open status, your background check does stay open for an additional 30 days, in which case a status of proceed or denied could still be applied to your background check even after you've taken possession of the firearm. In which case, if you are denied after taking possession, the next background check people will contact the gun store, get the information of the buyer, and ATF agents will go collect the firearms. General process of how it works. Now, in this case, how does this change? Now, for people under the age of 21, or let's just say 18 to 21, what this is going to cause is NICS examiners to have to do an even more thorough background check into juvenile records and things like that. Now, when information is put through an examiner, or if the automated system finds no connection to any type of marker that may prohibit you from owning that firearm, they'll go ahead and just shoot you right through to a proceed. That's why some people get a proceed the minute the person, the gun store owner or clerk, pushes the submit button. They come back with a proceed right away. There's nothing on there that's tripping up the system at all. You get a green light right away. Now, some people will go to further review. And if you've been in a gun store with yourself or maybe a friend, and you're sitting there for 20 or 30 minutes, that means you are being further reviewed. There is a human being on the other end of the line at NICS that is actively looking through your background check to make sure that you are not a prohibited person that may have been flagged along with your information when it was submitted. Now, what I think, but I cannot prove, is going to happen here is because it's going to be required NICS do a deeper dive into those individuals, I foresee that pretty much anybody under the age of 21 will go to further review. That is not dissimilar to people who are immigrants with a USCIS number, said that right, a green card. They can purchase firearms on a background check, but they have to elect that they are a non-U.S. citizen with a non-immigrant visa of some sort. Any single time any of those people are put through the system, NICS will delay them automatically so that they can further review that person. I have a feeling, but again, I can't say or predict the future, that will also happen with people under the age of 21. You will go into a gun store, you will be delayed, most likely, every single time. Now, with that delay, remember, NICS does have 3 business days to come back with a status on that person. That does not include weekends, that does not include holidays. With the way that this is written, for people under the age of 21, that will extend to 10 days. Keep in mind, that does not include, that's 10 business days, that does not include weekends, that does not include holidays. So over a period of a week to 2 weeks, that's 5 days plus weekend, 5 days plus weekend, that's 2 entire calendar weeks, unless there's also a holiday in there in which it could go even further. So you could be delayed for about 2 weeks, and probably most likely everybody under the age of 21 will be delayed for a period of about 2 weeks. Now, with that being said, that is the maximum amount of time, and to be fair, a status can come back sooner than that, and that is true even with people who have to wait 3 days today. But those people can wait up to a maximum of 2 weeks. That's 10 business days, not including holidays. So I wanted to be clear about what that really implies. Now, this does have a sunset provision of 10 years. What is a sunset provision? Well, if you remember the 1994 assault weapons ban, that also had a sunset provision, which basically means that if this is approved, it will last for a 10-year period, in which case it can be reinstated again if if it's brought to a vote to be reinstated. If not, this will expire in 10 years and everything will go back to the way it is now, where people ages 18 to 21 will be able to just go into a background check and they will be held under the same limitations as everybody else 21 years and older. Okay, moving on to subtitle B, defining engaged in the business. Now what this is referencing is licensing, so we'll talk about that. Updates the definition of who is considered a dealer of firearms to clarify the law and put high-volume sellers on notice that they should obtain an FFL. So this is something that has been kind of on the fringes of gun control for a while. That is trying to go after dealers who are unlicensed. And what that means is people who go to gun shows and buy and sell firearms for the purposes of profiting. They buy guns to later resell at a profit as a side business or a primary business without going through the process of obtaining an FFL. It's a federal firearms license. Now, if you want to know more of the specifics about the FFL and all different types of FFL, I have a very detailed video on this topic, which I will leave linked down below. But effectively what the ATF wants to do is anybody engaged in the business, they want to have lumped under the umbrella of having a FFL, a federal firearms license. FFLs are required to keep logs on all firearms that go through their hands. It's a A&D, disposition, or acquisition and disposition, logbook. So there's a record of the inflow and outflow of firearms through that dealer. Those dealers can also be audited, so their inventory can be checked, the A&D book can be checked, firearms through their inventories can be traced, so if a firearm is used in a homicide, let's say, and is recovered, that information can be traced through the dealer network to try and find who was in possession of the firearm at the time. Also, the dealers have to conduct background checks no matter where they are, gun show or at their store. Whereas a private seller, again, in most states do not have to. Some states do require this, but in most states you don't. They want to, in this bill, broaden that definition to try and put more people under the umbrella of those who should get a license so that those who choose not to can be punished or penalized for not procuring a license. The main way that they are doing this is the change of definition, so with principle to the objective of livelihood or profit. So that is to say, if somebody is buying a firearm for the purpose of, or with the objective of livelihood or profit, that's the way it's written now. They want to change that to is to predominantly earn a profit. And really this is a matter of intent in my perspective. And again, this is going to come more into legalese, which is not my area of expertise. But in this case, you have, if somebody is buying and selling firearms for livelihood, the explanation there, in my opinion, would be that they are doing this consistently over and over and over again. Of course, they have to generate enough money to support themselves and their family. So those people are easier to identify. They might be at the same gun shows every time, or maybe they're dealing out of their house consistently over and over and over again, and they're generating tens of thousands of dollars so that they can support their family. They maybe don't have any other job. Now, the way it's going to be narrowed is to say to sell a firearm with the intent of making a profit. Now, intent is always a very hard thing to prove. It's kind of like fraud or anything like that. So you would have to prove that the intent of that person was to only make a profit, or at least to make a profit was a part of the intent in there. So you would have to prove that in, I guess, a court of law, I would assume. But it is not limiting people who want to scale down their own private collections. I believe if you have a collection of 30 guns that you bought when you were in your 30s and now you're in your 60s and you want to liquidate them all, of course you're going to make a profit, because just the general increase in the inflation of money over 30 years is going to make those firearms more valuable today than they were back in maybe the 1980s. So it's kind of understood there that you're going to have a level of profit, but they are not prohibiting you from making a profit so far. And this is my understanding. Again, check with an attorney. My understanding is as long as your main intent is to buy it for the sole purpose of flipping and making a profit. The question here that relates to me is investing. So people might purchase a firearm today wanting to hold it for 20 years as a mechanism for investing. Will that prohibit people from investing in firearms? Because obviously the main purpose of you purchasing that firearm is that maybe 30 years from now it'll be worth something. But from now to 30 years from now, you're not actively dealing, you're not buying and selling. So having a license for 30 years would be kind of funny. Or maybe you have to get a license in 30 years before you sell your whole collection and then let your license expire. I don't know, I'm a little bit hazy on that, but the whole intent of this element is to bring more people who are buying and selling guns routinely to make money, to bring them under the purview of the regulations of the ATF. Okay, subtitle C is to use the burn grants for implementation of state crisis intervention programs, i.e. the so-called red flag laws. So currently the Byrne grant, this was something that was named after a police officer in New York who was killed protecting, I believe it was a drug smuggling witness or something along those lines. Those funds were to be allocated to certain programs. They're going to expand that, and this is again my interpretation, into crisis intervention programs or so-called red flag laws. What this is more or less doing, I believe, is adding funding to the states who have red flag laws on the books. They are going to narrow the scope by which somebody can apply for this. So, for example, putting penalties on people who abuse red flag laws to maybe get somebody in trouble, and they haven't done anything wrong, but hey, I don't like my neighbor because he owns guns, so I'm going to make an issue and hopefully have the police go take all his guns from him. They are going to put safeguards in this based on that, and also put penalties on people who are abusing the program for nefarious reasons like that. So as the red flag laws exist in I believe 20 states currently, these safeguards are not there. But that is, if you want to get this grant money in the future for your state, you have to adhere to those guidelines. So it's doing, in my opinion, sort of two things. It's trying to encourage states that do not have red flag laws to adopt red flag laws so they can be involved in this money. The other thing it does is take states that currently have red flag laws to try and tweak those and put guardrails on them so they can't be abused, which could be a good thing. So again, I'll leave that up to you to determine whether or not you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but this is somewhat of a backdoor red flag thing, at least in my interpretation. It doesn't really apply to gun stores, so I'll just move on from that one. Stop illegal trafficking of firearms. This prohibits the straw purchasing and trafficking of firearms by criminals. The funny thing is that is already illegal. What they're talking about also is enhancing the penalties of possession. They've said that, for example, if you are engaged in a straw purchase, you're purchasing a firearm, and I'll talk specifically about what a straw purchase is, but if you're engaged in a straw purchase knowingly, you can serve up to 15 years in prison. If you are engaged in a straw purchase knowing that the person who you are purchasing the firearm for is going to take that firearm and use it in a crime, and you can be in prison for up to 25 years. So don't get involved in straw purchases. A straw purchase, we've talked about a background check. You need to go into, when you go into a store, you complete a NICS background check over the counter. That information is run against the FBI NICS system, and then if you're approved, you can take the firearm home. Now, if you are somebody who is not going to be allowed to own a firearm, maybe you know that you have a felony. A straw purchase would be, let's say you have a friend who you know is a felon, and your friend knows that they cannot pass a background check. And your friend comes to you and says, look, I want that Glock 19 that's at XYZ gun store. Can you please go in and purchase it for me? You're going to use your information to pass a background check to get that gun out of the store, and then you're going to give it to me. That is a straw purchase. That is circumventing the whole integrity of the background check system. So for that, that is actually already a crime. If you do that currently today, you are committing a crime. That's already a crime. That's not changing here. It seems like what they're going to do is crack down on people who are doing that and increase the fines and the prison sentences to reduce, people from doing that. I will tell you, as a gun store owner, the straw purchase is one of the most annoying things. It is the number one thing we have to be the most vigilant about, because we as gun store attendants and owners, if we allow straw purchases to happen knowingly and we are negligent and looking for those straw purchases, we can also be financially and criminally held responsible. So there has been cases where ATF agents have gone into gun stores and have done straw purchases, trying to catch gun store owners and attendants to try and see if they can get them to let the obvious straw purchase go through. And then if they do let it go through, they get raided. This happened in a gun store, I think currently in Wisconsin is fighting a case like this. I have had customers come in and obviously get engaged in straw purchases. I am very, very, very sensitive to those, and the people that work for me, I train on how to look for those, because it's very serious. We don't want people out there in the community possessing firearms that they shouldn't be possessing. Number two is it's taking a lot of our time and resources when you're trying to play those games with us and get us to engage in that sort of thing. We've had people that are very blatant about it. We've had people that are not so blatant about it, but we try in every regard that we can to stop that from happening. So if we can discourage that from happening and have it happen less, I don't see that as a bad thing. I don't see any way that this can be slided into reducing law-abiding citizens, right? And I only care about law-abiding citizens, honestly. And then subtitle E, misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. Now, this is an interesting one. So this says it protects domestic violence victims by prohibiting criminals convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence as part of a current or recent former dating relationship from purchasing or possessing firearms for 5 years, provides a federal process for a restoration of rights for those individuals if they have not committed any similar crimes during during that intervening period. Now, I've listened to some people talk about this, and a lot of people are upset. This is what this is referring to is the so-called boyfriend loophole. I'll talk about that. But what people are upset about this is they're saying, look, if you're a felon, you can't own a firearm, but now they're going to lump in misdemeanors. So if you have a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, you are prohibited from owning a firearm. I will point out, though, that, again, as a gun store owner, you are already prohibited from owning a firearm if you commit domestic violence and you have a misdemeanor in the form of domestic violence. However, it's a little bit more limited in scope, and this looks to expand that, and I'll explain. On the background check, that's the one you are completing when you go into a gun store, you have to answer a series of qualifying questions. One of those questions is, have you ever been convicted in any court of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, or are you or have you ever been a member of the military and been convicted of a crime that included, as an element, the use of force against a person as identified in the instructions? So misdemeanor domestic violence does prohibit you from owning a firearm if, and we can go to the instructions, it sort of lays out what that is. It says committed by a current or former spouse, parent or guardian of the victim, so your wife or husband or ex-wife or husband or child with said ex-wife or husband, by a person with whom the victim shares a child in common. So even if you are not married or have not married, but you have a child with somebody and you've abused that other parent, that disqualifies you as well. By a person who is cohabitating with, so you are not married, you do not have children, but you are living with, you abuse that person, you are prohibited. Or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse, parent, or guardian, or you've lived with as a parent or guardian with somebody that you have abused, or somebody you are married to, not married to, or have been married to but are living with. And again, I'm not an attorney, I'm just trying to interpret this. Or by any person similarly situated as a spouse, parent, or guardian of the victim. So anything that I guess is reasonably considered close to that type of relationship. So really what this means is a current or former spouse, a person that you share a child with, a child of yours, or somebody that you live or have lived with. That's sort of now what this is looking to expand is also somebody that you are in a or have been in a romantic relationship with, even if you do not have a child with that person or if you do not live with them. What this effectively means is if you have a crazy ex-girlfriend, you need to be very careful. Now, I know that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's what this is looking to do. So it's not lumping in now necessarily people who are have misdemeanors, but that's already here in the text. What it's doing is expanding the amount of people who fall into that category. So generally, if you don't abuse people, you should be good to go, but there is also going to be an element of abuse of this regulation, which you need to look out for. Anyway, guys, that is my summary of these proposals and this sort of the bipartisan Safer Community Act. As a gun store owner, again, there's a lot of interpretation here for the legalese. There's a very, very large, an 80-page document that goes through specifically about what these things are and what they do. I'm going to leave you guys off with that. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.